is up, my friends? My name is David, and welcome to the very first episode of The Green Room. And I just wanted to do an introduction on what this show is all about. It's just another leg of the Life Stories podcast. It is the Life Stories podcast, but not life stories, if that makes any sense. But, anyways, welcome to The Green Room on the Life Stories podcast. I'm so excited to start this new kind of journey. I've always enjoyed hearing people's testimonies, and that was the whole start of the Life Stories podcast. But there are times when I want to talk about something that's not a life story, or talk with people that about something that's not a life story. So this is definitely what this is going to be. A lot of it's going to be maybe special um, the guests that are on the show, and they give their testimony or their story, and then we talk about what their stories about and a little bit more in depth maybe than just sharing a testimony. So I'm so excited about the green room conversations, or just the green room now. I had wanted it to be called the green room conversations, but it actually, I sat on this idea for a long time because I didn't want to drop it until I knew exactly what it was going to be. So I finally decided, and I felt it would just be called the green room of the Life Stories podcast. So I'm so excited to introduce this new show of the podcast. So, welcome everybody. But first, I wanted to talk about the 1 year anniversary of the Life Stories podcast. Y'all, honestly, this is kind of surprising because when I started this, it was a hobby and I really wanted to do it. But I didn't really think I'd make it this long. I thought that I would just go tired of it and it would just kind of die out and it wouldn't go anywhere. But exactly the opposite has happened. I have had people talk to me about them listening to the stories, and people that I don't even know, honestly. Like, that's the part that blows my mind the most, is that people have actually messaged me via the podcast platforms or even on YouTube, messaging me talking about the stories that were just shared. And that in itself blew my mind because I'm thought, well, there's someone out in the world that's listening to this I don't know, and they don't even live in this country, which is really cool. So that kind of fueled me even more. And then um just hearing the stories of people listening to the stories and how it encouraged them. And then even some of the guests listening to other guest stories, that really kind of egged on me to keep going as well. Initially, if you were here from the beginning, I wanted to do one episode a month because, man, it is a lot of work to put a show together. Do you know that? It's one thing to record and get the guest on and generate that. But then when you're the way I do the live stories is I record an intro after. Okay, so first let's back it up. Boop, boop, boop. I will record the story or the interview with my guest, right? And we'll go through that and then I'll save it. And then what I'll do is I'll come back either that same night or the next day and I'll record the intro and the outro. And then sometimes I'll go through the show and listen to the entire episode again and cut out things that needed to be cut out. Maybe some interjections that we might have had, or something that I've even had it where the guest was like, "Hey, you know what? I don't want that in there," and so I'll have to go back after it's recorded and take that out. So sometimes I'll jot down the time where the comment was made, or sometimes I won't. So I'll have to go through the entire show again, which is actually is fine by me because I will know again what the show was about before I actually record the intro or the outro, and then y'all can already hear it in me. I'm gonna try to be as raw, as real as possible on the green room because I stutter a lot. I have all these thoughts in my head that I want to say, and they're coming like a hamster wheel, just going, and like my mouth can't keep up. So when I'm trying to say something, I'm already thinking about three sentences after what I'm currently saying. So I will stutter a lot. So there's a lot of editing in that aspect when it actually comes to the Life Stories podcast interview. But for the green room, like, this is it. It's just, it is what it is, stutter and all. So I hope that y'all don't get annoyed by that. But um yeah, I go back and I edit that stuff out. So when I'm going back to what I was saying is that sometimes I will record just the intro and the outro literally 25 times because I just can't get it right. And then sometimes I'm just like, whatever, I give up. I'm just gonna say use that one and post it. And it's very frustrating for me because I'll be honest, is I'm not a process guy. I just want things to get done. Like I am praying for more patience. I'm praying that the Lord gives me more patience for the process of things. And sometimes I just want to get things done. And that affects me on my work life because I get so stressed out sometimes when I am trying to get a task done that maybe my boss needs, and I'm in a hurry to get this done, and I get really stressed out because it's not done yet, and I realize that I've got to go do the process to get these things done. But for me, that drives me crazy. And it's the same thing with this podcast is I don't like the process. Like I don't like sitting in my room, in this room, and going through and cutting and having to say it. And then I don't use any fancy video editing. I just use Apple iMovie and I put things together. And I don't think Apple iMovie is very user friendly. It's very tedious at times. So sometimes I've got to go and move things around, and it's very frustrating at times. So I actually did try to download another software, but remember, I'm not a process guy, so I just didn't want to learn it. So I just didn't do it. I ended up returning the purchase and just doing what I do because I feel like it's working. If it's not broken, why even spend more money on something that is working just fine? So that's my problem is patience, and I don't like the process. So um this is just gonna we're just gonna go right into it with the green room conversations, and just talk. Maybe not be as long as the life stories episodes. Some of these might be 10 minutes, some of these might be an hour, who knows, depending on the guests and the conversations. I have actually reached out to a lot of my previous guests about um this show, and a lot of them actually want to get back on. So see some repeat guests on this, like Sherry Adams from um, the last show that I did, who was the vocalist from Avalon, and she wrote the book Meet Moid. So she actually wanted to touch a little bit more on the original episode, but uh, kind of scale back just a tad bit because we want to get the story in there. But now I've got a platform to do that. So I'm super excited. So she's coming back on board. We've got to sit down and record that and talk about purity and sexuality and those kind of things, and just kind of dig deeper on those things that we kind of scratch the surface on in her episode. Also, I talked to Raina Nisus, who deals with who wrote the book about her dealing with her parents, both of them going through dementia. My family's kind of going through that right now with a family member of mine. So I wanted to bring her back on and talk more in depth on that subject versus her story, if that makes sense, if you kind of know where this is going. So I'm really excited about that. I may jump on here and just share a thought. And like I said, it could be 10 minutes. It's just an extra, you know what I mean? So there's gonna be no schedule um in this show. But again, there goes my thoughts. I'm going back to saying that back originally when I started the Life Stories podcast, I wanted to do it in one episode a month because it's a lot of work. But when I dropped that first episode with Teresa and Robert, it got such great feedback. I mean, to this day, it's still my most downloaded show on Apple and Spotify, which is really cool. And it's still when I pull up the app for Buzzsprout, it's that episode still pops up being downloaded, and I think that's so cool. And I think their story it resonates for so many people. But anyway, it that month it felt like it took forever to get to the next episode with Clay and with Clayton, and so I decided to do it every other week. And then there was a moment where I was doing it every week, and that was hard. But so now it's just kind of when I can get people on and share their story. So I hope you guys can bear with me, and I think you are because you stuck around this long, 1 year. I'm so excited. I would just thank everybody who has messaged me, who has commented on the Instagrams, on my personal Facebook, commented on the YouTube channels, Man, that means a lot. And like I said, I don't make a dime off of this. I'm spending more money on this than I am bringing in. So it is fun for me. Um, it is really cool to hear people come up to me at church. Oh my gosh, that is another cool thing. Like, it is the coolest thing when I get to church. And some of you that know, I go to a very, very large church here in San Antonio. And so a lot of people, we are on social media, so they'll see posts about the show. And so they'll drop in and they'll listen to it. And it is the coolest thing when I walk into church and somebody will come up to me and they're like, David, hey, we heard the episode, man, that was so great. And it's just so cool because even though that story may not have been something that that person that was listening is going through, but it definitely helped them to maybe minister to someone else that is going through that. And that's the whole point of this. Like I said, I'm not trying to be famous. I'm not trying to be an influencer or anything like that. I just want people to know that there are other people going through similar and the same things that they're going through. And the whole idea came when I was actually a guest on Teresa King's podcast. She has a podcast called Walking with the King, um, or Walking with Kings. I can't remember. It's been a minute, and um, she invited me on to share my story, and so I have yet to share my story on this platform. Still praying about that. I don't know if I want to, but if you're really interested, you can hop onto her podcast and check that out. Um, but she ended up messaging me and telling me that it was her most downloaded episode, and it just kept going. So I thought that was kind of cool, and I'm very grateful for the impact that that had. And then I was actually on one of my other friends' podcasts called the Free and Redeem podcast with Simon Andrade. And in that episode, it wasn't my story. Well, it kind of was. It was just the subject that he was going through at that time was called "Should Christians," and it was like he had an episode called "Should Christians, drink alcohol? Should Christians watch certain movies?" And then the one that I was on was "Should Christians leave their church?" And so that was interesting for me because I had just left the church that I was at for 8 years for various reasons, and he asked me to share my story on that, and so I did. And again, he texts me and says, "Man, I think you should really consider podcasting because that episode is the most downloaded too." So I thought, man, that's kind of cool. And I thought about it for a while, and then I started researching on how to start a podcast, and I found Buzzsprout, and then I had built up a bunch of points on this app I had, and then I bought my first podcasting kit, which had a microphone, the little stand, uh, the pop filter, like the cool, like round one, like a recording studio. Woo. See, this is why I gotta edit because that weird stuff. Anyway, but yeah, so I was really quite excited, and I had actually started like Teresa and Clayton, and then another guest I had after that. It was recorded via Zoom. So I grabbed the audio from that and then uploaded it to Buzzsprout, and then there so it went to Apple, Spotify, and all the rest. And then I started putting it on YouTube because I'm gonna tell you this because my grandma Gonzalez, who I absolutely love and I'm so grateful for. And if she's listening, Grandma, I love you. But we had I think it was her birthday, so we went to a restaurant and I was walking next to her and she's like, "Davy," my family calls me Davy, just if you hear that word come out. She's like, "How do I listen to your bulletin board?" I can't remember the word she said, but I think it was bulletin board. And I was so confused. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "I want to listen to your bulletin board, the thing you're doing." And I'm like, I'm so confused on what she is talking about. And then she's like, "The show that you were posting." And so I was like, "Oh, the podcast." And she's like, "Yeah, I want to listen to it." So there is the reason why I started uploading the audio on YouTube. And if you were there at that time, it was just like the cover art of the guest that time, and then the audio. But then it started picking up some like views, and I was like, All right, well, let me look into video recording and see if I can actually post the episode so that we can watch. Which I still to this day really don't like. But I do it. Um, and so therein lies StreamYard. Actually, first it was Riverside, and I didn't like the quality of the videos that they were uploading. So I downloaded StreamYard and started my service with them. So here we are, a year later, and I think the show could definitely be amazing. It's just again, I don't like the process, and sometimes I just do a quick job of editing. But I'm so grateful for all the encouragement. And I also going back to people coming up to church, and I will say yesterday we went to I serve in our high school ministry at church, and it was so cool because um, the week before um, I had met a new student that had come for the first time that one of my other students had invited. So we were talking, and he was talking to me, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's got a podcast." And so he asked me about it. So I just kind of showed him on my phone the graphic, whatever, and that was that. Well, yesterday, um, at Impact or midweek, and the guy comes back and he comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, David," and I was like, "Hey, what's up, man?" And he's like, "Hey, I listened to your podcast." He's like, "Man, it's so good," and I just love listening to it, and the stories. I just, man, honestly, that warmed my heart so much because I'm like, man, even the kids are listening to this, like, and I just loved it. Like again, I just love that the idea of these stories that people are going through are being distributed out to the whole entire world and hopefully will make an impact in their life. So essentially, that's another reason why I do this. And I'm just so grateful. So I just wanted to hop on and introduce the green room, kind of talk to you a little bit about what it is. Yes, it is still a life stories podcast. It's just less stories. And I'll still be doing the stories from guests. I've got some really cool guests that I have coming on board to share their stories here in the next couple of weeks. And then in between, the green room will get dropped in the podcast platforms and probably on YouTube whenever it does. And I'm just so excited. And I also have to say that today is uh, September 12th, September 12th, which is my niece's birthday. And I am missing it because I missed the text message in the family group chat. And so I am in the uncle timeout room. So happy birthday, Ariana. Love you to death. So I hope that you guys are as excited as I am for this green room show. Um, oh, maybe somebody's asking why is it called the green room? So I totally called it the green room because I got the idea too because a lot of times when I was interviewing guests and after I stopped the recording, we would stay on and talk. And a lot of time we start talking about things that, man, would be great conversations, and I hadn't recorded that part, so it was kind of like lost. Um, so, and I thought, like, someone who's been in worship ministry before or done, concerts and things like that, the green room is something that that's kind of like the backstage. So I was like, oh, this is the green room conversations like after the show is over, and you know the person in the show, we're backstage now talking in the green room. So that's where I got the idea of the green room. Um so that's just so you can understand where I got that from. But that's about all I had for today. Like I said, I just wanted to just come on here and introduce the Green Room show, and explain kind of like what it is and how it goes hand in hand with the Life Stories podcast. Again, it is still the Life Stories podcast. I actually was very close to actually making this its own show. And I would have the Life Stories podcast, and then I would have the Green Room conversations. But I didn't want to pay an extra $25 a month to Buzzsprout to host another show. And I think the Live Stories podcast has really gained some traction in its following and its reach. So I didn't want to start all over with that. So maybe at some point we can split the two and it's be its own. But as of right now, it's just kind of a little bonus. But Anyways, I hope that I didn't bore you with my rant or my conversation. I'm excited for this. I'm excited to continue on with the Live Stories podcast and share these stories that of God moving in incredible ways and meeting people exactly where they're at. And I'll say something about that real quick because this is a conversation that I have even with my coworkers when they find out about this about the podcast. Um, what I love about the majority of the stories that come on the Live Stories podcast is that these people met Jesus in the darkest of their times, right? A lot of them didn't meet Jesus in church or at the altar. Some of them met Jesus literally in the pit of their issues. And I wanted to kind of just spotlight that because I think we as Christians really need to accept the fact that God will go into the dark places to be with us. That is literally how much he loves us and how far he'll go to reach us. In that God still moves in bars, clubs, in parties, and in situations where we don't want to share about that we were at, because that's how much he loves us, right? And I think that is the most beautiful part of these stories is that every single one will tell you that God met them exactly where they're at. And in their darkest point and in their most miserable moments, God stepped in and was like, dude, like I never left you. Like I'm still here. I'm literally right here with you in the darkness. Like that just blows my mind. And for them to finally like snap out of it and realize that man, God does there's so much more to what we're going through and come to that turning point. I think that's beautiful, and I think that is literally the theme of the podcast of the show, and I just love spotlighting that because that was for me. You know, God reminded me who I was. There were so many times where I can tell you, maybe at some point, um, of being in this place that I should not have been, and literally hearing the voice of God speak to me and telling me I'm still here. I still love you. This is not who you are. This is not where I want you. I have so much more for you. And even though I still ignored him at that time, and it wasn't until later on where I finally decided, like, yeah, I'm done with this, you know. But I love that about these stories, and I want to spotlight more of that. And I'm so excited to keep spotlighting that with these stories, and then with the green room spotlighting a little bit more subject details and some touchy subjects. Um, and I've actually reached out to someone who doesn't necessarily align so much with what I believe to be true and what the word says to be true. But it's got such a great um like a way to approach the love of Jesus. And I wanna talk to him about that, and I'm a little nervous about that conversation happening because I don't really know what's gonna come at me, but I'm interested because I've seen his posts on TikTok, and I don't agree with everything, but, like, 98% of the things that he says, I'm, like, just mind blown on how he approaches the love of Jesus. I'm like, "My gosh, if the church could just tap into this, the difference that we can make, um, teaching truth and in grace." So I'm really excited about that. I have not heard back, but I'm gonna keep trying because I'm super, super excited to just conversate with them. But anyway, enough of that. I hope that you continue to come with me in the next year of the Life Stories podcast. And I'm so excited for the next year of the Life Stories podcast and the guests that'll be on. And yeah, I'm just excited. So bear with me as I'm trying to get these episodes out. And I'm so sorry I just rambled on for 24 minutes and 37 seconds. So, anyways, thanks again. Thanks for all the love and a lot of you guys reaching out. And oh, the guest that sent videos in to wish me a happy birthday for the podcast. That was the coolest thing ever. That meant a lot. So that was really cool to see them back on. And I did reach out. I'm not gonna lie, but it was cool that they said yes. And honestly, they didn't have to go and encourage some of the things they said. was extra. I didn't ask him to do that, and it really did minister a lot to me. So to you guys that did do that, thank you so much. It really, really, really means a lot. Um, in the text messages and all that. But anyways, well, thanks again. I'm so excited about the Green Room shows. So I will see you in the next episode. The next episode will actually be a live story. So stick around for that, and then maybe a Green Room show after that. But anyways, thanks for staying with me. I will see you in the next video, my friends. Love y'all lots. Have a great evening. Bye.